everyone, my name is ZeBirdBrain and today we are talking about character designs for rigging. Please note that the content of this video is not just my opinion. Just like all of my other videos and tutorials, this is based on information I saw in several studios and from asking different artists online from around the world and finding out what were the most common elements that came back. So in this series of video, I will try to explain what I will call the great no-nos of character designs for rigging. Alright, first, details on joints. By putting a detail on a joint, this means that the rig will need to use heavier and more complex method to have the detail show up on both limbs. It also means a whole lot of work for the animation team that will need to make this work in animation. And trust me on this, a detail on a joint is painful and time-consuming to animate. And it's even worse than compositing. I put details on the arm, but I made sure to make them stop before the rotation point of my arm. So then if I want to take my arm and move it, I don't have any issues into moving that arm at all because the junction is clear of any details. It becomes problematic when you try to take that design, and maybe if I had it stop here, exactly where the brake stops. I mean, it works great now because the limb is straight, but as soon as I try to move it, we're gonna run into lots of problems. And of course, these problems are solvable. You can like put the texture here, but you have to know that the animators will need to do that every time. Your character will bend its arm every time for every scene. And if it's like 5 minutes per keyframe to make sure that this works, maybe there's like 15 keyframes a scene and then it's 400 scenes in that part of the show. And then it just becomes so much time invested in something that is not important at all. But the worst part of this is that most of the time these details are purely design quirks and not even relevant to the story. And the time wasted to make this work is time that will not be put where it actually counts. So like an animator will waste maybe hours trying to get that little detail to work on this arm joint in that action sequence or whatever. Then this is time we will not be putting on that super cool expression shot where the character is like expressing and talking and actually moving the story forward. Because that's what we do in this industry, we tell stories. Second, putting gradients and texture everywhere. Now, don't get me wrong, a few gradients and textures here and there is a really great way to make a character or style nice and unique, and Harmony can totally pull it off. But be smart about it. Put gradients and textures where it's easy to manage, aka solo element that will be easy to rig and animate because they don't influence or spread across multiple pieces. If a designer texture spreads across multiple pieces, it creates problems in terms of how they bend. It's problems in terms of Z-depth. That texture needs to move with so many different pieces and it needs to stretch. It's really hard and time consuming. The other reason is that textures are usually heavy. If you use paper textures or photo textures or bitmap textures, it's even worse. It's going to be super long to render, we will not be able to animate it in real time, it is a nightmare. So if you have a character and you want to put gradients or detail in their hair, feel free to do so, but do it on smart things, like the bangs, so that you can keep it within the piece. So you see these little gradients in design, it's always kept within the piece, so that if I try to move this piece, the gradient is contained within that piece. Another place is cheeks and facial features like that, because cheeks will be one piece that you move around, so it's okay if I have this little gradient going on there. Another good place to put a texture is the edges of things such as dresses, shirts, and sleeve. So if I put a design on this shirt, I would try to keep it down there so that if I try to move it, it doesn't break as much and it doesn't intrude on the other piece. So then I can move it and nobody cares. If instead of a horizontal line I had vertical stripes, it would be a freaking nightmare. But I'm gonna cover that in a moment. Alright, so when it comes to gradients and texture, try having it on isolated pieces or on the edges of your clothing and elements. 3. Vertical stripes. There is absolutely nothing worse than this in rigged animation. It is virtually impossible to make those animatable. Sure, it will look great when it's like this, but if you try to take that leg and like bend it to have a character, walk, you're gonna take that leg and move it from the center pivot point. And then this will happen. All the lines will get messed up. So you will need to have like controllers to try and maybe have the thing aligned and you try to keep this, but like this part is easy, but then what happens with this part? It's gonna get like, it's gonna be so hard to animate, and this is something everybody agrees on. Vertical stripes on limbs is a nightmare, and this is gonna cost so much to animate. So here I have an example from Glitch Tech, and I can actually talk about this one because we were actually the one who called it. So we received this design in our studio and we were like, it looks gorgeous, but if we're gonna make this hybrid, which is a mix between hand-drawn and cutout animation, these stripes are going to be problematic in the designs. And then the team was like, oh, really? We didn't know. So what could you propose else? Because we told them like, yeah, if you want to take the leg and maybe just move it a little, slightly to fake perspective or something, the texture is going to break, the line is going to not align, and it's going to be very hard to keep it to match. We could always like put deformers in there to have the line match, but this is time we will not put into Mitch's face as he speaks and he explains what his problems are. And actually that was gorgeous because the team listened. They're like, okay, so what can we do? And we're like, the textures on the sleeves, they work here because they're on the edges, so they won't affect the whole body, so that's okay. So we proposed to change this design to something else, and actually they left most of the side blank and they just put this detail here that appears only on the suit's tie. So we had the vertical stripes removed and we put this instead. And honestly, I know that the vertical stripes, they look better. As a design choice, this was the best call. But as a production choice to have your show actually animate on time, that's why we changed this, and instead we made these vertical arrows. So then if you try to make very expressive poses like this one, you don't have to worry about the lines trying to match like that all the time. And now, just to prove a point, let me just show you some examples. So this show is a cutout animation show. It's called Pen Zero, and the designs are gorgeous. I mean, this is cute, but look at this texture affecting so many different pieces and all these vertical stripes and designs. This show, I don't know, but it must have been super hard to animate and composite. And this is just because of the design. All these choices are sure to have made the production much harder than what it should have. So let's take a look at these designs and just see what could and maybe could work less good in terms of cutout animation. So the hair here is pretty easy because even if there's a texture, you can still take it and just make it move like that. So that's not much of a problem. Where it becomes a problem is if you look at these characters. So look at these hair. How are you gonna split these into different pieces? Or here we have like these textures spreading across all the hair, but how do you separate these pieces? This is gonna be a nightmare for rigging, and it's going to also be a nightmare for animation. If we look at this suit, there is so many textures going on. So this arm has these vertical stripes, which are a big no-nos on limbs. But if you took these designs and removed these stripes here, and would just leave them on the collar, that could have worked because the collar is one piece and one piece. So that's gonna make it easier. But on this, like, you have to think that the arm will be spread out like that with the hand, and there's gonna be stripes like that. So when the animator tried to rotate this arm, it's gonna be super hard to keep these lines aligned. If we look at this example, it's really great. So the 101 Dalmatians is a show about Dalmatians, so they're bound to have lots of different spots and stuff. But if you look at this series closely, they always made sure never to put spots on joints. So if you look at the leg here, and I draw something real quick. So this would be where the joints will be. And you look, there is never any spots on there. Because this way, animator will be able to rotate the pieces without having any spots in the way. I was not on that team, so I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it's pretty cool that the spots are reserved to whole pieces. And there is never spots in any joints of a leg or a paw, for example. So see you again next week, and I hope that these little things will help you on your designs. So just as a reminder, it's always best to avoid having textures, vertical stripes, and details on rotation points or across multiple limbs. And try to limit the use of textures because they are heavy and hard to handle. Alright, so see you again next week on another video. Bye bye!